In this video, we will be talking about falling block swaps. Now you will ask, what is a falling block swap? And a falling block swap is basically a method that allows you to get falling blocks of blocks which you usually can't get in the game. Like usually in the game, you can only get falling blocks of sand, gravel, dragon eggs, anvils, and concrete powder. But if you do a falling block swap, then you can also get like falling end portal frames or falling mob spawners or falling barrier blocks. You can of course get these falling blocks using commands. So for example, this command right here spawns in a falling end portal frame. And if it drops on a torch, then you get a falling end portal frame item. The most funky looking item is actually decaying leaves. Like there's a block called leaves 2, which can be found on trees naturally. And if that drops on a torch, then you get a weird looking item which has no texture. And with commands, you can of course get all of these items, but the question is, can we get them in survival? And now falling block swaps are very difficult because they require multi-threading. And in this video, we will assume that it's possible to get an observer line on Untitled running on a different thread. And I will soon explain a bit more what I mean by this, but in this video, I will not explain how you get these async observer chains. I will just assume that you can get them, and there will be videos published by other people like XCOM, maybe Earth Computer, and Punchstar, and so on, which will publish stuff explaining how to get the async observer chain. And this video will only explain how to use the async observer chain to get the falling blocks. So to get like falling blocks, you need to first do a chunk swap to get the async observer line, and then do the falling block swap to get the falling blocks. And I will only talk here about the falling block swap, and I will not talk a lot about the chunk swap. Okay. And if you want to design any falling block swap contraptions or just want to test them, then I recommend getting a carpet mod. I will also link it in the video description because it has many commands with which you can easy test. So for example, there's a command for turning on instant tiletics. In vanilla, if you want to turn on instant tiletics, you have to build an update suppressor for a liquid pocket and populate the chunk and stuff. Then in carpet, there's also the async beacon updates command, and this allows you to start a new thread and send out a block update on the new thread. And this would be super annoying to do in vanilla, like it's survival friendly, and like XCOM and so on will publish videos about how to do that. But if you just want to design the contraption, then it's good if you have just a mod with which you can test stuff. And then there's also like a command for turning on the instant falling flag or disabling it. And also if you do anything with async observer chains, then you also usually want to do async packet update fix 2, because otherwise you will get chunks which are full of ghost blocks where you don't see what's happening at all because the server isn't telling your client what's happening. Okay, and now let's get to the actual topic. The first thing I want to explain is how observers behave on instant tiletics. And the thing is that if you have a long chain of observers on instant tiletics, it's very laggy. It's in fact exponentially laggy. If you have an observer chain of length n, then the last observer will send out 2 to the n block updates whenever you trigger the observer chain. Because if you make the observer chain one longer, then whenever the first observer gets updated, it will turn on and it will turn off. And both when it turns on, when it turns off, it triggers the entire rest of the observer chain. So each observer you add to the observer chain doubles the amount of lag which the observer chain creates. But at the same time, it doesn't update suppress. Like usually if you make something which sends out like infinitely many block updates, it quickly does a stack overflow and update suppresses, but observer chains are actually very good in this regard because the stack size of a function call only increases linearly with the length, while the amount of block updates increases exponentially. So you don't get an update suppression, but you get a lot of lag. So here I can show in game how laggy servers on instant tiletics are. So if I enable instant scheduling, which is a command for instant tiletics, I flick this lever, then one of the pistons will send the packet to the client before the observer chain gets fired, the other piston afterwards, and then we can see how much delay these observers create. So we see here we have a few seconds of delay. See how much it is. So we had here several seconds of delay, and if I just break one observer, then the delay will be cut in half. So now we should have roughly half the delay. So this was very quick. And if we were to add one more observer, then the delay will roughly be doubled, which is this extent. It's of course not super precise, but that's roughly the idea. Like just modifying this observer chains very slightly, heavily increases or decreases the amount of delay and doubles it or cuts it in half. So what is an async observer chain? To understand what the async stuff means, we need to understand what threads are. So in Minecraft, there's usually just one thread, and the game usually happens in game ticks, and these game ticks are processed on the main thread. And if everything's on the main thread, then that means that everything happens after each other, and there are no two things happening at the same time. But there are a few things in Minecraft which start a new thread which runs in parallel to the main thread. Namely, if you place down a stained glass block, then the stained glass block will, for some strange reason, start a new thread. And on that new thread, it will check for beacon blocks below itself and will schedule that these beacons are supposed to change their beacon beam colors or something. And this, for some reason, happens on a different thread than the main thread, and it runs in parallel to the main thread. And usually, this doesn't take long because it just checks like 250 blocks below itself, and when it's finished, and when the async thread is done again. So usually, this new thread, which gets started by the stained glass block, only lasts like a few milliseconds or nanoseconds. I don't know actually how long it lasts, but it's usually very short. But what now Coolman and Earth Computer and Excrement on discovered is that you can make this async thread last much longer if you get the right circumstances. So under very unusual circumstances, you can use the async thread to load a chunk. And if you manage to load a chunk using the async thread, then you can also trigger a chunk population. And if you can trigger a chunk population, then that sets blocks, and you can detect these blocks using an observer chain on instant tile ticks. And because these observer chains on instant tile ticks are exponentially laggy, you can then make the async thread live as long as you want. So it then doesn't just live a few milliseconds, but it actually can live for several minutes or hours or centuries, unless it somehow crashes. Like if it can somehow crash due to bad interactions with the main thread, but it lives a lot longer than just a few milliseconds if you trap it in a long observer line on instant tile ticks. So that's basically the idea. And then you have two things running at the same time. You have a main thread running, which does the usual game ticks and does the usual game. And in parallel, you have this long lines of observer runnings, which constantly sends out block updates at the end, and which keeps our alive the async thread. And how to actually do this, how to actually trigger like the chunk loading and the chunk population on the async thread, this is the topic of another video on a different channel. And here we will just assume that you can get these async observer chains and will now use them to make blocks fall down. In Carpet mod, you can get an async observer line by using the async beacon updates command. You set async beacon updates to true, and you set instant scheduling to true. Instant scheduling enables the instant tile ticks, and the async beacon updates command makes it so that whenever you power a beacon, it will start a new thread and send out a block update on that thread. So if I now power this beacon, the beacon will start a new thread, and it will send out block updates on that new thread. And then we use this long observer line to lag out this thread forever. This is how you get async beacon updates in Carpet. And in vanilla, this is of course more difficult, but it is still possible to get these kinds of async observer chains in survival. And if you right click this a bunch, then you can see that it blinks. Basically, this is now a chunk where you will not see anything. Like if you have a async line running through a chunk, then the chunk will quickly stop sending packets, and then you get stuff which is visually a bit weird. So like this is just visuals, like server side with piston bit retract, but it looks a bit weird. And in general, these async observer lines have like a lot of weird properties. They can sometimes do stuff that nobody understands. So for example, if I click this thing, then there is a chance that some of these will just turn into observers. Right here, you can see it. Right here, the last observer from this line suddenly turned into a dispenser for some reason. And we currently don't really understand why it does that. But if you add a lot of new block states to a subchunk, then it can sometimes happen that some of these observers turn into other blocks. So to understand falling block constructions, we of course should understand the mechanics of falling blocks. So I will now explain how sand behaves on instant tile ticks. What I will now explain is not new or original, it just gives a rundown of all the mechanics. So when a sand gets updated, while having air, fire, or liquids underneath it, it can do one of two things. There's the instant falling behavior and there's the normal falling behavior. The instant falling behavior gets activated if the global instant falling flag is true, or if the sand is in a chunk which is not entity processing. So if it's instant falling is true or the sand is in lazy chunks, then it will do instant falling. And if instant falling is false and the sand is in entity processing chunks, then it will do normal falling. When a sand does instant falling, then it does the following thing. When it gets updated, when it sets itself to air, and when it sends out block updates around the position where it sets itself to air. And after it sends out these block updates, it will go to a position where it's supposed to land, and then it will send out block updates around the position where it landed. One interesting consequence of the instant falling behavior is that if you have instant scheduling and instant falling on, then a stack of different gravity affected blocks will actually change the order when falling down. So if I turn on instant scheduling and instant falling, then and then activate the stack, then we will actually see that the anvil will be at the bottom and the dragon egg will be at the top, so like this. And the dragon egg also deleted one of the sand blocks because dragon egg 1 isn't falling delete stuff. So the reason why this happens is because each of the gravity affected blocks first sets itself to air and sends out block updates before it falls down. So if I just have gravel and air here, then what will happen is that first, and I break this block, when first this sand will set itself to air and it will update the gravel above it. And when the gravel above it will get updated, it will also set itself to air, and then the gravel will first finish falling down, and then the sand will continue executing its code and get placed below. And next, the normal falling behavior. If you have a normal falling sand, then the sand will actually not delete itself, it will only create a sand entity, and that's basically it. Or to be more specific, if you have a sand doing normal falling behavior, then it will check what block state is as its own position and create a falling entity of that block state. And this is what we will later exploit in like the falling block swaps, that if you replace the sand by a different block, then you get a different entity. But usually a sand block will just create sand entities, and if you update a sand block multiple times in one game tick on Untitled, then it will actually create multiple sand entities. And it will, you can get as many sand entities out of one sand block as you like. However, most of these sand entities will delete themselves once they get processed. So as long as these entities don't get processed, you can get many sand entities. But as soon as the first of these sand entities get processed, the sand will check whether it's inside a block of the same block state. And if it is, then it will delete this block and continue to fall. And if one of these sand entities get processed and sees that it's not in a block of the same block state, then it will just delete itself. So if you use one sand block to create multiple sand entities, then the first sand entity will get processed and delete the sand block, and all the other sand entities which get created will just delete themselves, because they, when they get processed, they are inside an air block and they weren't ticked yet, and then they will just delete themselves. So right here I have a construction which will show the normal falling behavior of falling sand. So right here we have an observer chain which is 8 long, so it will send out 2 to the 8 block updates, which is 256 block updates. And over here we have command blocks will just which will count the amount of sand entities which get created. So this just does an execute at e type equals falling block and then implement some scoreboard value. And now we will see that we actually get 256 sand on the scoreboard. So if you can read the scoreboard on the right, which you probably cannot, it says 256 because that's the amount of sand we got here. Now, next up are falling block swaps. To get falling block swaps, you need to start execute the code of a sand, and then replace the sand by a different block while it's executing the code, and before it creates the falling block entity. So what we do, we update the sand, and then it runs the code, and while it's running the code, we replace it by a different block. And then the sand code will get the block state at the position and will create an entity of that new block state. And then once the entity gets processed, the falling block entity will check whether there's a block of the same block state at that position, and if there is such a block, then it will delete the block, and then the entity will fall down. That's how falling block swaps basically work. But this requires multiple threads, and basically here I just showed the code through which it goes when it tries to fall down. We have here wet regions and green regions, and the green regions show the code during which falling block swaps are possible, and the wet regions show regions where falling block swaps are not possible. And basically if you update a sand, then the code, which I represent by this yellow dot, will go through the code, and you need to replace it on the other thread by a different block while the code on the one thread is in the green region. So one thread will be going through this code, and we will do it repeatedly because we will actually update the sand multiple times, and then we need to get lucky that we replace the sand at the right time. So to get the falling block swaps, we have 2 threads. We have one thread which will just do a bunch of stuff and then set a block at a specific time, and the other thread will have an observer chain which will very quickly update the sand a lot of times. And on this other thread, there's always a part of a code during which falling block swaps cannot occur, which is the red part, and there's a green part during which it can occur. And then these two threads will run at the same time, and then the one thread will replace the sand by a different block. And if it happens at the right time, then this sand block falls down. So here is a setup for falling block swaps which uses command blocks. And if you want to design falling block swap contraptions yourself, you should really take a look at this setup, because this forms the basis of all the other setups, and all the other setups just try to imitate what is happening in the setup. So what we have right here, we have one command block which will place one sand over here next to the observer. So this just places a sand here. And then we have another command block which replaces the sand by an end portal frame. And what we will do is we will, when we flick this lever, we first place the sand here, and then we directly replace the sand by an end portal frame. And what we will also have is we will have an async observer line running here. We will have an async observer line running, and this async observer line will update the sand which gets placed at the time very quickly. And when we place the end portal frame here on the main thread, and then we have a chance of getting a falling block swap. Also, I added some command blocks here again to count the amount of sand entities we get. So if I flick this now, then we got 32 sand in this attempt, and in this next attempt we got 218 sand, so you can see that it kind of varies. And now we got 113 sand, and if I just do this often enough, then I will eventually get a falling end portal frame. So I just need to flick this often enough, and eventually we will get it. So let's just flick it a bunch of times. And here we go. So right now we have here a falling end portal frame, and all the sand entities are actually just client-side visual glitches. The only thing that is actually real here is the falling end portal frame. But the thing is now, if we drop this on a torch, then we get an end portal frame item. So if we now go here, then we pick up an end portal frame item. So how do we do the same thing without that block command? How do we replace the sand by a different block? Now this depends on the kind of block. For each block this is different. The easiest probably replacing concrete powder by concrete blocks. That should be probably the easiest thing to do. But in this video I will cover how to replace sand by nether portals and how to replace sand directly by end portal frames. And for other blocks you have to figure it out for yourself. But the methods I will show here should it should be possible to adapt them to also many kinds of other blocks. Okay, so how do we get end portals? I will show two methods. I will show one method which only requires a single thread, where we just use instant ticks to replace a sand by a nether portal, and then I will show a simpler but more unreliable multi-threaded method. So first the single-threaded method. If we want a sand block to be directly replaced by a nether portal, then what we need to do, we need to start lighting a portal. And when the first portal block gets placed, we observe this with an observer on instant ticks. And then what we do, we update some sand and some dragon eggs which we placed above a nether portal frame. So we update the stack, and the stack will reverse direction, and the dragon egg will fall down, and the dragon egg will destroy parts of the nether portal frame, and then the sand will fall into the portal. And now the good thing is that the nether portal has already done the check whether it's a valid nether portal. So the nether portal will now continue placing nether portal blocks, and then it will be able to replace sand directly by a nether portal block. Now to actually do a falling block swap, we do have to have air underneath the sand. So when the nether portal block directly below the sand with which we want to do the swap gets placed, we observe it again. And then we simply update all the nether portal blocks, and the nether portal blocks will realize that they are not part of a valid portal, so they will disappear. And then we're in a situation where if now the portal continues lighting, it will replace the sand by a nether portal block while it has air underneath it. And if we then make sure that the sand does normal falling behavior, then we can do a falling block swap with this sand block right here. So of course, to get the sand in there, we need instant falling behavior. So at the beginning of a contraption, we either need to have instant falling on, or we need to have this contraption in lazy chunks. And after we have placed the sand into position, we then either need to switch off the instant falling flag, or we just need to make the chunk entity processing, depending on what we did. But this is basically the idea behind the single thread method for Nether portals. Now, if you want to do falling block swaps with Nether portals, there's one additional complication. Namely, after you get a falling block swap with Nether portals, you need to do additional stuff to ensure that the Nether portal entity survives. Because the problem is that after you get a falling block swap, the async, the observer line will still update the Nether portal a bunch of times, and the Nether portal will not be part of a valid portal frame at the time. So the observer line will actually update and delete the portal block. And this is a problem because if when the entity gets processed for the first time, it will see that it's not part in a block of the same block state, so the entity would then just delete itself. And the only way you can avoid this is by relighting the Nether portal. So if you want to do falling block swaps with Nether portal, then you first need to do a falling block swap. And after the falling block swap, the observer line will delete the Nether portal. And then you have to remove the observer line from the position. Like, you just need to make sure that it cannot access the position anymore, and relight the portal at the position. And only then does the Nether portal entity actually survive, and you get a falling Nether portal entity. So this is how the single thread method for Nether portals looks in game. This is a falling block swap contraption for Nether portals. So right here we can see the Nether portal frame. And here's the dispenser which will light the portal, and when this dispenser lights the portal, it will place Nether blocks column by column. And the first column will be the column here on the left side, and when it reaches the upper part here, this observer will detect it. And you need, of course, Untitled on for this contraption to work. And then this observer will instantly update these weights, and these weights, like are budded weights, they will turn off, and they will update this sand stack up here. This sand stack will reverse direction, and this dragon egg will break the upper part of the portal here. And the dragon egg will fall further down and break the lower part of the portal here, and it will land down here. This observer will detect it, and it will update this lava bucket dispenser here. And this dispenser will dispense lava here and place an obsidian block here. And we just do this because we want to immediately repair the portal, because after we need to relight the portal at the end. So we after we broke the portal, we also repaired again. Okay, and after this happened, the sand falls in. So we here have currently 6 sand blocks. So we will get a stack of 6 sand blocks in here. We will also get a sand block up here, but I don't want to place it because it would update the contraption. So we get then our sand stack here. And after the sand stack arrived here, we also update this dispenser up here with a magma bucket and completely repair the portal frame again, so that we can later relight the portal easier. Okay, and after we have done this, then the portal will continue to light, and the portal will then replace all these sand blocks down here by Nether portal blocks, and then at the end we will have one sand block up here in front of this observer here, and with this one we will do the falling block swaps. And when the sand block below this topmost sand block is replaced, we will update the Nether portal blocks again so that they disappear, and then we will have a floating sand block here. And then over here, this observer line is the async line, so we have an observer line over here, and we will activate this on the async thread, and then we will have a falling block. We will have a floating sand block which gets updated by the async line while there's air underneath. And the only thing we need to do is we need to make sure that we turn off the instant falling behavior at the right time. So in this contraption, we have everything in lazy chunks at the beginning. So this right here is supposed to be an unloaded chunk at the beginning. And when the sand block below the topmost sand blocks falls out, we update this piece of water. This piece of water turns into floating water, which gets detected by this observer, and it updates these weights. And this will then load this chunk, and as soon as this chunk gets processed, these chunks will be entity processing, and then the sand does normal falling behavior. And then we have some chance of getting a falling block swap here, because we will have a floating sand, and we will have async observer line firing into it. And after we have done all of that stuff, we will also activate some pistons, and the pistons will, on the one hand, they will remove the first 2 observers of the async observer line, so that it no longer updates the portal. And the second thing we do is we activate this dispenser here with flint and steel to relight the portal, and then we have some chance of getting a falling Nether portal. So I will now try to show this contraption in action. So the first thing we need to do, we need to enable async beacon updates, instant scheduling, and we need to set our view distance to 2, so that the chunk is unloaded over there, so that it isn't entity processing. And now the next thing we can do is we can start the async line. So we are using async beacon update. So this is now our async line. And now if I activate this lever, then it will activate the contraption and it will also tell me how many sand entities it generated. Right now it didn't to work because it only generates one sand entity. But over here we also have a button which resets the contraption. And after the contraption is reset, we can try it again. Also, we should look at the chunk screen. In Carpet there's a chunk debug screen, and we need to make sure that this chunk over here is unloaded when we activate the contraption. I guess the first attempt didn't work because the chunk was probably loaded. Okay, I think the async chain works, so I will quickly replace the async chain. So let's do another attempt here. So we flick this lever. And now the contraption is working as intended. We got 50 sand. The sand counter says 50. So we got 50 sand entities in there. And this, as soon as you have like more than 2 sand entities, that you know that the contraption is working as intended. And now I will just repeatedly activate the contraption and reset the contraption. And if I do this often enough, then we should eventually get a falling never portal block. So let's just see how many tries I need. It says pressure plate activated. Now there are two possibilities. One possibility is that we got a falling never portal block. The other possibility is that a stupid lava bucket activated our pressure plate, which is what happens here. Okay, here we got another good attempt. We got 233% and it says the pressure plate activated. So let's check it out. And now here we were successful. We got here a falling never portal block. Yeah, this contraption can produce falling never portal blocks, and it is more hardware independent than the next method I will show, which uses multi-threading. So let's check out the next method. Now, secondly, there's another method with which we can replace sand by never portals, which uses 2 threads. Namely, the idea is that we use an async observer line to trigger a never portal lighting on the async thread. So instead of lighting the portal on the main thread, we light it on the async thread. And then we just lag out the lighting of the portal. And then a player can just walk into the portal and place sand into the portal, or a person can push sand in. And after the lag on the async thread stops, the sand will be directly replaced by another portal and can then be used for falling block swaps. So I will now explain how to replace sand directly by never portals using multi-thread methods. And it's easier to explain this in game than in a PowerPoint presentation because it actually looks quite nice in the game. So what we have right here is a never portal frame, and we have a dispenser here with a flint and steel, and we will now activate this dispenser on the async thread. The way we do is that we first get ourselves an async observer line. So right here we have the async observer line, which is blinking. And I made sure to apply the carpet fix so I can actually see it blinking. And what we will now do is we will quasi-power the dispenser, and then the async thread will update the dispenser, and the async thread will fire the dispenser. So the async thread now started lighting the never portal. And right here I had a very long chain of observers which observed the placement of this never portal. So what the async thread now did is it placed this never portal block, this one, this one, this one, this one, this one, this one. And now it would like next to place the never portal block up there, but it's currently busy going through this observer chain because this is a very long observer chain and it's still stuck in there. Okay, and now while the async thread is stuck in this long observer chain, what we can do is we can just walk in here and we can place a floating sand block in here. And now we have a floating sand block right here, and currently we have normal falling behavior. And if I now destroy this async line, then the async thread will continue placing never portal blocks, and then this sand block will get replaced by another never portal block. So if I now just punch out some observers here, then you can see that the sand block now got replaced by another portal block because the async thread now continued lighting the never portal, and this can also be used for falling block swaps. So this right here is a falling block swap contraption which uses multi-threading methods to replace sand by never portal, and it produces falling never portal blocks. So you need to first activate the async observer line here, and after that you just place sand in here, and it places the sand in the never portal by just pushing it in with a piston. You just put in sand after each other, and it's like everything's automatic basically. The only problem with this contraption is that it's hardware dependent. It works very well on my computer. Right here we got a falling never portal block. On my computer this contraption works very well. On XCOM's computer it also kind of works, But on some other hardware, it doesn't work at all. So, for example, on Earth Computer's computer, it didn't work at all, and also Attila00 tested this contraption. It didn't work on his computer. So, if you want to use this on different hardware, you might need to adapt some observer delays, and if you do that, it might become much more laggier, and so laggy it becomes unusable. But on some computers, this is a very nice contraption for producing falling Nether portals, because you just put in like falling sand, and then you get falling Nether portals. So I will now try to explain this contraption. The idea is you drop in the sand, and when the sand arrives down here, it updates this piston right here. It's currently a budded piston, and this piston retracts. And when this piston retracts, all these pistons here will retract, and these pistons just create block event delay. Because this is like a Threadstone contraption, this actually uses multi-threading and has race conditions in it, and I'm using block event delay to make sure that no other pistons fire in the world while this contraption is running. So like if you have like another piston clock anywhere in the world, then I want to make sure that this other piston clock finishes all of its block events before this contraption actually attempts its race condition. So this just has a bunch of pistons at the beginning to make it a bit more reliable. Like, don't be fooled, this is still super unreliable with contraption hardware dependent, but this at least helps a little bit. Okay, and now the actual contraption then basically starts here after the block event delay. The first thing we do is we retract this piston, and when this piston retracts, it fires this repeater line, like we are on Untitled, so we don't create delay, and this turns on this Threadstone dust, and this quasi-powers this dispenser. And now the idea is that the async line is constantly updating with the dispenser. So when we quasi-power this Threadstone dust, then the async line will update the dispenser, and the dispenser will start lighting the Nether portal. One issue of unreliability is that it might actually take the dispenser quite some time to check whether the Nether portal is valid, and this can make some problems. But on my computer, it almost always manages to actually start lighting the Nether portal. And when the async thread starts lighting the Nether portal, it like places here like Nether portal blocks in the first column, and then in the second column, and then it eventually places them in front of like these observers here. And then the async thread will be trapped in this in this observer line. But one thing to note is that this line isn't very long. It's not that much. And as soon as the async thread is in this observer line, we start our race condition, because this observer line is supposed to lose a race against 6 piston actions on the main thread. So the async line will be in this async observer line, which is I think 13 observers long. And on my hardware, 13 observers is the perfect numbers, but on some other hardware, you might need to extend it by 1 or 2 observers or make it shorter, and you might also need to modify this observer line here, which will be activated on the main thread later. Okay, so this is the first thing we do on the main thread. Then the second thing we do on the main thread is we retract this piston, and this piston will turn off the power source here again. So we just turn this Threadstone dust back off. And then after that, we wait for another block event, and after that, we activate this line, and this line will actually activate the piston which pushes in the sand. So we drop in the sand, and the sand lands right here, and this piston will start pushing it in. And then we just have a simple CO-tick push generator, so that this piston will actually CO-tick the sand into place, and then we will have like this situation. Wait, let me first. Okay, it's in spot. And then we will basically have the situation where the piston CO-ticks the sand into this position, and the async line is currently this is also a position where the async line will next place the Nether portal block, because the async line has already placed this entire column, and this has placed in this column up until this block, and now it's waiting in this observer line, and then it will replace the sand by a Nether portal. Yeah. And the last thing we do is we retract this piston, and this piston will go over here and activate this piston down here. We'll extend another piston. This piston will just be necessary to destroy the portal at the end. We will actually be creating a headless piston here. But this piston will just start extending and set like a block 36 here. And when this piston extends, we will also observe it with some observers on the main thread. And we have here 14 observers on the main thread. And these observers on the main thread will now start updating the sand at super rapid speed. So in the previous contraption, we had like an async observer line update the sand, and we replaced the sand on the main thread by another portal. Here we do it the other way around. The sand gets replaced on the async thread by another portal once this observer line runs out, and on the main thread we update the sand all the time. Now the idea is that while the main thread is trapped in this observer line of 14 observers, the async line will finish the delay of these 13 observers, and once the async line finishes the delay of these 13 observers, it will replace the sand by a Nether portal while the main thread is updating it all the time, and then you have some chance of getting our falling block swap. Okay, and then the next thing that happens is the async thread will also replace the block 36 of the piston head here by a Nether portal, and this will actually give us a headless piston here. And then the async thread will just finishing lighting the portal. And then if we got a falling block swap, then one thing we need to do is we need to relight the portal at the end. So like we just break the Nether portal, which gets placed here by a block update. And then we use this dispenser over here to relight the portal, so to make sure that the Nether portal entity survives. And then if we did not get a falling block swap, then we still relight the portal, and then to do the next attempt, we need to find some way to get rid of a Nether portal blocks again. And the way we get rid of a Nether portal blocks again is by just deleting them with a headless piston. You might think that you could also just delete the Nether portal blocks with a water bucket dispenser, but that actually doesn't work on instant tile ticks because these water bucket dispensers always update the press. So the most reasonable way to delete a Nether portal on instant tile ticks is actually to just use a headless piston. So much for Nether portals. Next we come to end portal frames. To understand how to get end portal frames, we first need to understand a bit about stronghold population. So the main problem with end portal frames is that you cannot just directly place the sand where the end portal frame is supposed to appear, because when a stronghold starts populating, it first fills the room with air, and this means that the sand block does not directly get replaced by an end portal frame if you just have it in position before. If you just had a sand at the correct position before the stronghold population starts, then the sand would not directly get replaced by an end portal frame, but it would first get replaced by air and then would get replaced by an portal frame, and this is then not usable for falling block swaps. So to get a falling block swaps for end portal frames, you actually have to make sure that the sand lands in the stronghold room after the stronghold has started populating. And again, we have single thread and multi-thread solutions for this problem. Here is the single thread solution. What we do, we again have like a stack of sand and a dragon egg on top at the top of the stronghold room. And now what we do is we start populating the stronghold room, and it clears out the stronghold room with air. Now after it has cleared it with air, we now want to place the sand at the correct location. So when the upper layer of the stronghold room gets replaced by air, we observe this with one observer, and we update the sand stack with the dragon egg, and they fall down, and the dragon egg will break the floor of the stronghold room, and the sand will land on top of the dragon egg, and the uppermost sand block will be at the correct position where the end portal frame gets placed. Now, after we have done that, what we will do is we will delete the block below the dragon egg. One way to do this is by creating a snow golem, which deletes the snow block below the dragon egg, and then the dragon egg and the sand will fall out again. And now when the sand block below the topmost sand block falls out, we need to make sure that we detect a block update from this and turn off the instant falling flag, because otherwise the sand block which we just placed at the correct location here would also instant fall, and we don't want this. So we detect the sand block below and turn off instant falling. And to turn off instant falling, you need to populate another chunk. So you need to have another chunk safe stated and then populate it, and then instant falling is off. And then the sand will still get an update, but it will just do normal falling, create a sand entity, but it will stay there. And now after we have done this, the sand is at the correct location and it has air underneath it, and then we can just let the async line update the sand block all the time while the main thread continues the stronghold population, and then right here the sand gets directly replaced by an end portal frame, and this can be used for a falling block swap. Now this single thread method for end portal frames cannot be done with every stronghold. The end portal frames need to be in a specific location in the chunk in the stronghold, otherwise it doesn't work out spatially, because we need the end portal frame to be accessible from an async observer line, and we also need to have rails which detect a block update when the sand below the topmost sand block falls out, and it only spatially works out if the end portal frames are like in the middle of a chunk along the x direction. So this is a limited method, but if you find a stronghold where you can do it, then this is probably the most reliable method for getting end portal frames. So right here, this is what the single thread method for end portal frames looks like in survival. So over here we have a chunk which is safe state as unpopulated. We've got some safe state machines up there. Safe state is as unpopulated, and every time this chunk populates, it places this corner of the stronghold room. it doesn't place the entire stronghold room. When a chunk populates, and if it populates that part of the stronghold room, then it only places that part of the stronghold room, which is in the 16 by 16 area, which is 8 offset from the chunk in positive X and Z direction. So that's like an area in which populates stuff, and after that it just cuts it off, and the rest of the stronghold room would get generated by chunks which are next to this chunk. So this chunk only generates like this corner of the stronghold room, and this is a very good location for a stronghold room because we've got here a portal frame placed right on the corner, so we can just have an async line going directly into the portal frame, and also we can have rails detect something from position directly below the end portal frame, and the rails are in the east direction next to this position next to the block, so they will get block updates first. So like if I have a sand down here and it falls away, if I have a sand stack down here, and if the lower sand stack gets deleted, then it will first update the rail before it updates the sand above it. So this is what makes this location very good for the falling block swap. Okay, and now how the contraption works is we populate this chunk over here, and we populate in such a way that the redstone power flag is off when we populate it. So like here we just update this redstone dust, and this redstone dust will check whether it should get powered or not. And when it does that, it will load this chunk. So we will populate the stronghold while the redstone dust power is off. Now the stronghold will populate. When the stronghold populates, what it will do, it will first clear out the entire room with air. So all of these blocks will get deleted. And then it will fill out more of air, and at some point it will delete this gold block right here. And when it deletes the gold block right here, we will detect it with these observers. We'll have instant tiltics on. And instant falling will also be on because when you start any kind of population, it always turns on instant falling. So we will have instant falling because we start with stronghold population. And when we have this stack of sand and the dragon egg, and this set of sand and dragon egg will fall down, the dragon egg will destroy here the part of the floor, and we get the sand stack on top. The sand will update this rail, but this rail will not turn off because currently it is still powered down here. So we just get the stack of sand. And after the stack of sand has finished falling down, these observers will update this rail. And this rail is currently not budded, but it would be budded if we turn off the redstone flag. So currently we have this piece of redstone dust, power these rails, and if we turn off the redstone power flag, then these rails become budded and then they can turn off. So this contraption only fires if you turn off a redstone flag, and this is kind of convenient for survival that the contraption doesn't do anything if you have redstone power flag on, because you can just go to this contraption and it doesn't break the contraption if you want to modify something. So it only fires if you actually activate it correctly. Okay, anyway, these rails turn off when this repeater turns off, and when this repeater turns off, it turns off this rail down here. So like if this repeater scan, the rail down here is unpowered. And when this rail down here gets unpowered, these rails up here get budded. So these rails are now no longer completely powered, but they're only bud powered. And then the next thing it does is the rails go down here, and here we have the dispenser with a pumpkin inside. And this dispenser is quasi-powered, so when it updates, it will place a pumpkin here, and it will create a snow golem. It will delete these 2 snow blocks. And when these 2 snow blocks get deleted, the dragon egg will fall down, and the sand will fall down. And also the sand below the top sand block will fall down. But when the sand block below the top sand block deletes itself, it will send out block updates, and it will send out block updates in the east direction before it sends block updates in the direction upwards. So it will first update these rails, and these rails will now turn off because they're now budded. And then it will also activate these rails over here and these rails over here. Then go to another chunk which deactivates the instant falling flag. So we have another unpopulated chunk which we save state, namely up here we've got another save state contraption, and we save state this chunk right here. And the reason why we take this chunk instead of another chunk is that this chunk right here doesn't have any caves underneath it. So in the 8x8 area in which it would place blocks during population, it will not place anything. And we want to make sure that this chunk doesn't place any liquid pockets, because we need to turn off instant falling without turning on instant tiltics. So this needs to be a chunk which does not place any liquids during population. So the rail line which we update over here, it goes through this tunnel, and it goes over to this unpopulated chunk and loads it, and it populates it. And then we have turned off the instant falling flag, which we need to do for like the falling block swap. So after we have then loaded this chunk, what happens is we will have a floating sand block right up here, while the sand blocks below it have already been deleted. So we will then have some kind of floating sand block here. Okay, and then the next thing we do is we load another chunk here. So after the weights went over here, they will also go into the observers and update these weights, and we'll load another chunk here. And the reason is because we use another unloaded chunk to disable the async observer line at first. So this chunk over here will at first be unloaded. And the reason we wanted to have unloaded is that we don't want the async observer line to come in here too early. So if instant tile tick blocks are less than 8 blocks away from unloaded chunks, then they won't fire. And if we have a chunk in the corner over there unloaded, then all the tile tick blocks in this area won't fire. So initially we have the async line in here, and the chunk over there is unloaded. This means that the last 4 observers of the async line will not fire. The reason we do this is that we don't want the async line to update the sand while instant falling is still on, because we do have quite some time during which instant falling is still on while the sand block doesn't have any blocks underneath it. It takes some time to turn on the instant falling flag. We want to make sure that the async thread isn't firing while we do this. But after we have turned off the instant falling flag, we then load this chunk over there, and then all these observers are then in a 2x2 grid of loaded chunks, like they are more than 8 blocks away from unloaded chunks, and then they can start firing. So we use the chunk unloading to first disable the async observer line, then enable it at the right time. Okay, and when we have enabled the async observer line, we have floating sand in place and instant falling is off. And then we are basically done with the contraption, and now the main thread can continue placing the rest of the stronghold, and the main thread will then also place an end portal frame while the async observer line is constantly updating this block. And then we have a chance to get a falling block swap. And then the last thing we do is we just activate some pistons. Over here we have pistons with a slime block, and if we get a successful falling block swap, then the end portal frame will fall down here, and it will get launched over with these slime blocks, and it will activate this pressure plate, and then we will get a signal so that we know that the whole thing worked. Now we want to, of course, do multiple attempts in a row, and to do the next attempt, what we need to do is we just save state this chunk, which has been tile and contraption in it, and then we need to reload the chunk. And now there's one difficulty. If you reload this chunk while the async line is running into this chunk, then the first 8 observers of the async line will be so close to unloaded chunks that they will no longer get processed, and then some of these observers can get stuck in a powered state. And for that reason, we have pistons which just pull and push, and pull the observers so that they get back to their powered state. So basically, if you have an observer which is stuck in a powered state, then you can simply get it back to an unpowered state by simply pushing it. For example, here we have some observers which are stuck in a powered state, and if I now simply push them with one observer with a piston, then you can see now it's unpowered again, and we have to do this with the first 8 pistons of the async observer line. So to activate the contraption, you actually want to stand at a glass platform which is 16 chunks away from the contraption. So the contraption is over there in this direction, and in the chunk debug screen, I'm standing here currently in the middle of the screen square, and the contraption is over here. This is where the contraption is. Put them out again. Okay. Okay, and now also some command blocks here which just activate the async line, like the async beacon updates in scheduling, and then they just set one redstone block to activate the beacon. So you want to press this, and then you just want to flick this lever, and then the contraption will do 1 attempt for every autosave. And if a contraption ever manages to get a falling end portal frame, then it will tell you, because it will light up this lamp here. That's basically the idea. So you just flick on this lever. You need to be like at the platform at these coordinates, and then it's just a matter of waiting. Okay, the contraption right now didn't work, so I made some small changes and some bug fixes so that one of the save states isn't failing, and I hope it will work now. So let's try this again, turn on the async line and turn on this thing, and now we just wait. Here. Now it fired, and now we can go in there, and then we will see a falling end portal frame. So if we look down here, the falling end portal frame will be on top of this fence. So this is how the contraption works. If you have luck. Like on the right side it says attempt 3, but I actually used more than 3 attempts because I reloaded the backup multiple times every time the async line broke. Yeah, but here we got the falling end portal frame using the method where we only use the one thread to replace the standby end portal frame and have our thread only update its async thing. But if you cannot find a stronghold for which the single thread method works, then you can still try the multi-thread method for end portal frames. The idea is again quite easy. You populate the stronghold on the async thread, and then you slow down the population on the async thread. And after a room has been filled out with air, you can then just walk in and place down a floating sand block, and with this floating sand block you can then do the falling block swaps. Now there is one big problem with the async stronghold population and async structure populations in general, namely they are a synchronized method call, and this is kind of bad. So there's the mapgen structure clause, and it generates the structures, and this is a synchronized method call which is supposed to prevent multi-threading interactions. And the mapgen structure class has another function which is synchronized, which always gets called when a chunk gets loaded. And what this means in practice is that if you do an stronghold population on the async thread, then the main thread is no longer allowed to load any chunks, otherwise the game will freeze forever. So if you populate the stronghold on the async thread and then leg out the async thread, and then you need to make sure that the main thread never loads any chunk. And this is quite difficult to do in survival. So this is a very crashy method, but if you manage to get it to work without crashes, then it can have even some advantages over the other method because it works for every stronghold, and you can even do twice on multiple end portal frames instead of just 1 or 2 end portal frames. So async structure population is again something which is easier to show in game than in a presentation. But before you do any async structure population, the first thing you should do is you should spawn in a few players around you, because you don't want to load any new chunks while you do it. So like currently on the chunk minimap I see I load this area, and I will just load a few players. Like these are just command blocks spawning players. So like now 4 players join the game, and these will load like an area around me, and I will wait until these have loaded all the chunks they need to load. Because once I start the async structure population, I cannot load any new chunks. And I also reloading chunks would be bad, like we actually need to keep them perma-loaded, and we do this with players. Okay, and now right here is an area where the game will start populating a stronghold when I repopulate the chunk over here, and there's a simple carpet command for async repopulating called chunk async repop. If you do this command, then it will populate the chunk over here. So the chunk borders are right here. Like, this chunk will get populated on an async thread. In survival, you can do this by first creating an async observer line and then make it activate some welds which lead to this chunk and populate it. Or you can just directly perform a chunk swap in such a way that this chunk gets async populated. Before we start the async structure population, we of course need to turn on instance scheduling. Now we can start the async structure population. Okay, it will now start populating the stronghold. The first thing it does, it populates this floor. And over here we have an observer line which detected when this block got placed. So the async thread is currently trapped in this observer line. So the observer line, like the async thread populated this chunk, it has placed this part of the floor. It hasn't placed the floor entirely yet. It will still continue placing this part of the floor later, but currently it's in this observer line. And if we now remove part of the observer line, so if we interrupt the lag by just going up and punching out stuff from up here, then the async line will no longer be trapped in this observer line, and after it's gone out of this observer line, it will continue populating the stronghold. So we can now see that it filled some of the glass blocks in this room with air. It has filled this room with air, and when it was replacing like this glass block with air, it went into the next observer line. So the async thread is now lagged out again, but it has populated more of the stronghold than before. And we can now also punch this out. And then the next thing it will do, it will fill the entire room with air. So we can now see the async thread has filled the entire stronghold room with air, and it's now placing the ceiling. And the last block it has currently placed is like this stone brick right here. And when the stone brick was placed, the next observer line saw it. Okay, and we can now even lag out the async thread on on more occasions. So for example, one thing we could do is we could place like an observer line here, and then we could see how it completely finishes building the room, and then it starts building stuff inside the room. So if we now interrupt this observer line here, then it will go into the next observer line. We can now see the room is completely finished, and it now starts placing blocks because we want to build like the lava pool. So it first starts building blocks around the pool where it wants to place the lava. Can now actually also start detecting the first end portal frame. But and we can also now demonstrate that it can replace sand by end portal frames, even though actually I will just let's place the first end portal frame because I currently can't place sand in front of it without freezing the main thread. So let's punch this out. And if we punch this out, now it goes into the next observer chain. And oh, I actually didn't observe the end portal frame here. I actually just observed the stones there in front of the end portal frame. Okay, but the end portal frame should get placed right here. And what we can now do is we can get out a rose bush and some sand, and then we can show that the sand will be replaced. So let's just get rid of the lava here. So what we can do is we can place like a sand here, and now the sand will get directly replaced by an end portal frame if we now continue populating this. So let's look at this. So let's make some delay for the async thread here. Let's now put it next to command blocks. And then let's remove the previous delay. And now it's got into the next observer line, and now it has placed the first end portal frame and has replaced the sand block which was there. And what you can do now is you can actually place like 12 sand blocks in total. Oh, okay, okay, this was a short one. Yeah, I was worried for a moment that I might have frozen the game when I punched this out, because you don't want to activate observer lines on the main thread. But what we can now do is we can just place sand here in all 12 positions, and they will all get replaced by end portal frames, and you can do like falling block swaps with each of them. So like this, and if I now were to just guess I can maybe observe this one. And now punch out this part when some of the sand will get replaced by end portal frames. So yeah. So we can now see it has placed these 3 end portal frames, and after that it placed these 3 end portal frames, and now it has placed this end portal frame. Yeah, okay, and if these sand were actually floating, then you could get falling block swaps if you also were updating the sand block on the main thread. So you would need a bit more complicated contraption, but basically the next sand block which would get replaced by an end portal frame would be this one, and we can maybe try to do one falling block attempt, but it's unlikely that I will get it on the first try. So like what you would do for like a falling block attempt is you would have an observer line which updates the sand a bunch of times very quickly, and then you would need to update this observer chain while also breaking the async delay. So what you would do is you would maybe move a floating bush down here, and then place this here, and now the piston will eventually get an update and interrupt this line, and then the async line will die out while the main line is updating the sand. Yeah, okay. And this has a chance of giving when you like a falling end portal frame, but to actually get good chance if you of course want to build a contraption. Anyway, I now no longer interrupted the async thread, so it now finished populating. But this is basically how you can get sand directly be replaced by end portal. So if you now want to get falling end portal frames using async stronghold population, what you will need is you will need line of observers which detects when the ceiling of a stronghold finished being placed. You want to have players around you loading the entire area so that no new chunks get loaded during async stronghold population, and then you can use your async observer line to load the chunk which triggers the population. start the population. And in the first step, what will happen is we will get this empty stronghold room. Now, to actually build up our contraption, we have to advance the stronghold population a bit further, because currently it would still place a lava lag in here, and we don't want that, so we advance the population a bit further by observing the placement of a stone brick wall, which gets placed here. So we make a new observer line here, and then we break the first observer line over here, and then the stronghold population will continue a bit. Okay, now it went over here, and now we have placed all these things. Now the only thing which the game will still do, it will place 2 more stone brick stairs, and then we'll place the end portal frames, so we now can build up our falling block swap contraptions in here. I will just load it from a structure block. But in survival, you would have to build up this contraption while the async stronghold population is running. Now, before you activate the contraption, another thing you need to do, you need to turn off instant falling. In survival, you can turn off instant falling by going into the Nether and loading an unpopulated chunk. You currently can't load any unpopulated chunks in the overworld on the main thread, because that would crash your game. So what you do, you go into the Nether, you load some kind of unpopulated chunks, switch to save state, and then instant falling should be off again. So I hope instant falling is now off. Okay, this didn't work, but you can just go into the Nether and like populate a chunk here, and then instant falling will be false. That's the idea of what you do in survival. And after you've turned off instant falling and built the entire contraption, you can go down there and then activate the contraption. And the way you activate this is by flicking this lever. And when you then activate the contraption, it will actually do falling block swap attempts on all of the 12 end portal frame items. But this is very laggy for the client, so I might need to restart my client, but after that we can see whether we've got any falling end portal frames here. So I'm back here after the lag spike, and we actually got one falling end portal frame right here. So this worked. Like, it actually took me 3 attempts. This is the 3rd attempt I did now for this video, and now we got one of the falling end portal frames. It's probably possible to make it more reliable by designing it, because it should in theory do like attempt on all 12 of these end portal frames, but it's currently so unreliable that in practice it only does like roughly 6 attempts every time you activate the contraption. But if you just do it often enough, then you can get like here, falling end portal frame. So the way this contraption works is that whenever one of the end portal frames gets placed, on the async thread, we have an observer line which detects it, which is, I think, roughly 12 or 13 long. And it will go through there, and after it has spent some time in here, it will update this piston, and it will schedule a block event. And this piston will schedule a block event on the async thread, but it will only process it on the main thread. So this is a way to get from the async thread to the main thread by just using a piston. And on the main thread, this piston will then extend, and when this piston extends, it actually cuts this async line, and this cuts the delay of the async line much shorter. So after this piston has extended, the async line will very quickly die out in here, and the async line will then place the next end portal frame. But another thing that happens when this piston extends is that we actually also have observers observing the piston, which go down and update the sand block where the next end portal frame gets placed. So when the piston extends, the main thread goes into the observer line and updates this sand here a bunch of times, and the async thread during the same time dies out in its observer line and then plays the next end portal frame. This is how we get one falling block swap attempt at this position. So you just have like an observer line on the main thread and an observer line on the async thread. And then after we've done it on this block, we just have the next async line and the next piston, and the next main thread observer line, which then does the falling block swap attempt on the next sand block. And we just do this for all 12 sand blocks, and then you've got this giant observer mess, which can do up to 12 falling block swap attempts.